Hello, my little monkeys. This is Mrs. Gabriel once again presenting the third part of Unit 8 on aquatic and terrestrial pollution. We'll be working with 8.9 to 8.12. 8.9 is about solid waste disposal, your trash. Okay, put your left hand over the chart. Cover it, cover it, cover it. And then try to guess what you think most of our municipal solid waste is made up of. Municipal solid waste. Don't uncover it yet. While you're thinking about in a circle chart what the waste is made up of from your house and everybody's house in your neighborhood, this is part of our solid waste. And solid waste is any discarded material that's not liquid or gas. So we're thinking about domestic, which is municipal, but there's also like industrial waste and agricultural waste. So uncover it and take a look at where, what our trash bags look like on average. So a lot of it is paper, followed closely by food, then yard trimmings, which both don't have to go in trash bags. There's other ways we can throw some of that away or get rid of it. And then followed by plastics and metals and other recyclables. And to the right is two pictures of e-waste. And e-waste is known as electronic waste, and that's any discarded electronic devices, which include TVs, cell phones, computers, and their parts. It can be very, very toxic. Ooh, so there is a lot to learn in this topic, 8.9. So it's all about how we get rid of our solid waste, which is kind of divvied into two sections. So you need to be able to describe solid waste and how we dispose of it, and you need to describe the effects of how we dispose of it. So you're most familiar with the bottom picture, which is a sanitary municipal landfill. Maybe you haven't seen pictures of it, but your trash gets collected and it gets brought over to the Scarborough landfill, which is in northern Harford County. And that consists of a bottom liner, and that liner is made out of plastic or clay, and I'll show you pictures and a video link to it in a little while. And it also has a stormwater collection system, a leachate collection system, and a cap, all kinds of fancy stuff. That's a sanitary landfill. That's where your trash bags all go. And when it's full, it just gets capped off and it has to be monitored by law. We also have in the top picture, this is not in our country, well, unless it's in somebody's backyard, which is not supposed to be legal, is open landfills, which happen, or they occur most often in less developed countries. And they smell, and that brings rodents and other pests, and they contain solid waste and leachate that just goes in the stormwater runoff and everywhere else in the wind. It's very, very flammable, and it does not look nice. A sanitary municipal landfill consists of a bottom liner, which is mostly made of plastic or clay or both, and that's what I'm following here with the laser pointer. So that's your liner. A stormwater collection system, which is, if it rains or water gets in here from any kind of muck, that it has to be collected into a water system. And this is also where our leachate goes, which is the water that leaches toxic material and other chemicals out of all the trash. And then a cap. So here we see the cap. The cap goes on right here, after it gets full, of course. And then once it's capped, they put a methane collection system on there. And there's your methane collection system. So factors in landfill decomposition include the composition of the trash and conditions needed for microbial decomposition of the waste. So we do have to think about decomposition of all the material in our trash. So what's in there, what can decompose, and what kind of microbes are going to be available for that. So I snagged a couple more pictures from google.com so that you could get a nicer view, side view. Remember that we're looking at a sanitary landfill here. So if you just follow my laser pointer, you can see this is our liner, right? And the liner is made of anything that's supposed to be leak proof. And then we have our clay liner right there, right? And then you have your layer of trash that goes here, And then after a day of filling that with trash from all the trash truck deliveries, they'll cover it up with some other kind of soil. And then they'll put another day of waste in here and they'll cover it up. And then eventually they put another clay cover on it. And then they put another like cap on it. And then they put soil and all kinds of other stuff that will eventually grow some kind of cover on it, like cover crop, like grass. And then you see a picture down below of the landfill leachate system. Now you're going to have to look in the PowerPoint to get the links to these, but this is a YouTube video on how all liners leak. It's a nice animation. And then another one on the engineering of a modern landfill. Oh, let's look at this open landfill right here. So remember I told you factors in landfill decomposition. The decomposition in landfills include what the composition of the trash is and the conditions needed for microbial decomposition of the waste. So is there going to be air, and is there going to be water, and is the temperature going to be warm enough for decomposition to occur aerobically? And if not, when a landfill gets capped, such as in this picture here, or a capped landfill here, if it gets capped, we're going to have anaerobic decomposition occur. And if anaerobic decomposition occurs, then we're going to produce a lot of methane. And methane you've learned about before because we've talked about methane with like manure, and we've talked about it with mining and with our natural resources like petroleum and natural gas, right? But if you look at the rest of this chart, you will see that 15% of all methane emissions came from municipal solid waste, which was in this type of sanitary municipal landfill. And then I showed you a picture in here and a picture over here of the capped landfills, the sanitary landfills, actually having a methane collection system. Okay, here's a sneak peek at an AP Classroom video of all the things that I just taught you, where solid waste comes from. So where cover it up and see if you can answer by not looking. And solid waste can come in a bunch of categories, including e-waste. It most often goes to landfills. And what are the parts of the municipal landfill, the sanitary municipal landfill? And then remember, anaerobic decomposition produces what? Methane. Okay, so remember, solid waste is any discarded material that's not liquid or gas. So if we don't put it in an open landfill or a sanitary municipal landfill, then we can also incinerate it. So that's one of the other disposal methods. So through incineration, where waste is burned at very high temperatures, we're going to reduce the volume of all the waste. Look at all the trash in the picture in the bottom. So we can reduce all the waste by burning it, but the consequence is once it incinerates, we're also going to be releasing air pollutants that we're burning. This video is phenomenal. If you can't watch it through me or my slides, just type in YouTube, waste to energy plant, trash to energy incinerator. Type that in. You can kind of see it on the tiny part of upper part of the YouTube video picture that they're showing. The graphic designers in this not only just did a great job with graphic design, but they showed you all this stuff that we've been learning about in a couple different units about energy conversion and mitigation devices that we've learned about last unit with particulates and steam degeneration with a generator, and it's all really beautifully animated.
Incineration of waste can provide municipalities with electricity, heating, and grabs have a dual function. They mix the waste to make it homogeneous and heat the combustion furnace. In the control room, the technicians control the facility's operation.
Well, I hope you were able to watch that last video on trash to energy, burning our trash and then converting it to electrical and steam in a cogeneration plant. It's all good stuff. You've been learning all about it. And they even had the baghouse filters and other types of devices to mitigate the pollutants from burning trash. That's what's important and easy to take away. All right, so again, some items cannot go into sanitary landfills because they're illegal to just put in there and we have to collect them some other way. The reason they're illegal is because they will cause environmental problems. And one example of that is rubber tires. So rubber tires are not allowed to just be thrown away randomly in your trash can. It's illegal to do that. So if we leave them in piles, that's also against the law now, because leaving a bunch of rubber tires, hundreds of rubber tires, actually collects all this water, and that water is a perfect breeding ground for mosquitoes. So here are mosquito larvae. They do really well in an environment like this, and as you know, mosquitoes can carry disease and make us sick. Some countries dispose of their waste by dumping it into the ocean, and this practice, along with other sources of plastic, like plastic bags and six-pack holders, has led to large floating islands of trash in the oceans. Have you heard of the Great Pacific Garbage Patch? So all of our plastic ends up in these floating islands, and then wildlife can get entangled in the waste, or they can ingest it and it makes them sick. So I showed you some pictures of that solid plastic waste because it floats. You can see it in the top picture. And eventually, if you look at the map, it just migrates and finds its way into the middle of those circular currents that we call gyres. And then you can see in the woman's hand, she's just holding lots of little pieces of plastic that have been weathered and weathered and weathered down. Not microplastic size yet there. So it's illegal for you to just dump your trash anywhere you want in our country, but in other countries, like the less developed ones, they really do just dump it right into the ocean, and we're all paying for it. So in the middle of the Pacific Ocean especially is our largest garbage patch, and you can just see hundreds of feet thick and for miles and miles and miles in diameter, there's just this big circular trash pile. And you can see in the pictures different aquatic wildlife look at it as, is this something that I can eat, or they get stuck in it when they swim through it. And then I did show in that little middle picture for you, the smaller one, those are microplastics. Those are microplastics. Oh, and then I also put a snapshot of information in number 3 in the picture from AP Classroom number 3, solid waste in the ocean can impact marine life by some of the things I told you, and also by bioaccumulation and biomagnification of ingesting that plastic. You should pause the video because the first half of this slide is all the essential knowledge statements that I just taught to you, and you can read it on your own. And then the picture on the left is just a snapshot from AP Classroom, because e-waste contains persistent pollutants. Persistent, P-O-P, persistent, remember POPs? And in this case, we're not just looking at POPs, but just persistent because they don't break down easily in the environment and they're not metabolized easily. They just stick around. So e-waste definitely can't just be thrown away in your trash can. It needs to be disposed of safely so that the toxic heavy metals do not interact with the, some kind of acidy muck that is made from the rest of your trash bag, and then it breaks through a liner and gets in your groundwater. So under the Clean Water Act, the Safe Drinking Water Act, RCRA, and CERCLA, these things are monitored by the EPA to make sure that people are fined and companies are fined for allowing the toxic metals from e-waste to get into our trash and therefore our groundwater. And incineration, we do have to worry about those same heavy metals, but with burning them. So when we burn them, they get into the air, which is why we have all those other filters there, and that is monitored closely by the EPA under the Clean Air Act. All right, so you learned a little about incineration. So we do it because it does reduce the waste volume. And because we can burn that trash and we can convert it into electrical and heat energy. And then we have just, dumping our trash illegally. I mean, it's easy to do because it doesn't take up any space and it's convenient. It's against the law, but people do it. But by doing that, we're really putting a lot at risk with our health, with our groundwater quality, and with our drinking water quality and our air quality. And then there's dumping into the ocean. It's convenient and we're not filling landfills. However, it's going to impact our marine ecosystems. Make sure you pause the video and read these essential knowledge statements to yourself and say something else about them after you read each one. Okay, so you just learned about all the waste we generate and what we do with it, where we take it once it leaves our house in the trash bag. And rather than filling up a landfill or burning it because of all the cons associated with it, why don't we just reduce our waste? Okay, so by the end of this, you should be able to describe changes to our current practices that could reduce how much waste we generate. Okay, there's a whole lot of pictures to look at here. So we're going to start with this pyramid, this upside down pyramid. And this is our food recovery hierarchy. So if you're eating food at dinner and you don't eat every single thing on your plate, well, that's a problem because eventually, follow my little laser pointer, your food is going to go into the landfill or it's going to get incinerated. And we all know the cons of that. So the next best thing would don't even put that food into your trash and let's try and compost some of it. Some of it can't be composted, guys, but some of it can. It's still only, the second least greatest thing. And then we have industrial uses like reusing things for energy, to recover the energy, specifically like grease oil. Or we can feed animals, or we can feed hungry people, but we do run into problems with sanitation of the food. But the best case scenario is source reduction. So reduce is the key word for that purple. Reduce, as in reduce, reuse, recycle. You can't reuse your food, you can't recycle your food, but you can reduce the amount of food that you even buy or make. Source reduction is the best way to be sustainable, which brings me over to recycling. Reduce, reuse, recycle. Recycling is actually the worst option. Reducing is the best, reusing is the second best, recycling's still good, but it's the worst option. And here's why. Recycling actually is a lot of work and a lot of energy to go into recycling it so that we can reuse it. So think about it. If you put all your stuff out in these trash cans, sometimes we have single stream. So you put your glass and your paper and your cans all in one. Well, someone else has to sort that material. Someone else or some kind of assembly line machinery that's not very good at it. And you still have your trash men and women picking this stuff up and bringing it to the recycling center. So we have all this possible stuff that we can recycle, but then we have to put a lot of manpower and energy into making it into what we want. And then we have our compost pile. So reduce, reuse, recycle. It kind of falls under the recycling because it's just recycling. We're not reusing the food. So composting is great. I don't know if you learned about this in middle school, but you were supposed to look up this video, Why is Composting Good for the Environment? So you can understand a little bit more about the how and why.
Have you ever thought about where your leftover food goes after you throw it in the trash? Are there consequences that it has for the planet? And what else do you know about how to separate things that just straight up planet or being creative with things that has a total impact to the health of not other stakeholders? Food stacks up food carbon control Third, composting diverts waste from landfills, preserving natural ecosystems that would otherwise be cleared for landfill use. And the best part, you can compost in your own backyard.
So you can watch the rest of that video on your own and you'll just get some of this information right here in number 3. Composting does produce topsoil for us, which is kind of nice. So that's under that recycling piece. It can be done on your own, or we can actually compost like our Christmas trees and our yard scraps through the county. You can bring your stuff, you can bring all that to the landfill. And not all of our compost, or not all of our food scraps can be composted. Remember I said that. They just won't break down. They'll produce like some really stinky odors, and they'll attract pests that you do not want. And a couple other things that I want you to take away from what you're looking at here. E-waste and getting exposed to those heavy metals in e-waste. Some of those heavy metals can lower your IQ, can decrease your ability to pay attention, and make you an underperformer in school. And e-waste is relevant under the laws that with RCRA, CERCLA, the Clean Water Act, and the Safe Drinking Water Act because of those hazardous materials and those heavy metals. So remember, reduce, reuse, recycle in that order. Okay, going into a little more detail about what you already learned. So landfill mitigation strategies. A mitigation strategy, remember, is just how do we not put as much trash in our landfill. So we're still going to put trash into the landfill, but how do we mitigate that, make that a smaller amount, do less of it? Well, we can burn our waste or incinerate it, which you've already learned about it, and we can turn that burned waste into energy. Or we can, after we've filled the landfill, we can restore its habitat just like we do with mining and mining reclamation, and put a park on top of it, playground, a golf course. Another thing is that combustion of gases from a landfill, from that decomposition of material like methane, can also be used for turning turbines to generate electricity. So these will both reduce the landfill volume. Because I know you just can't get enough of it, I provided more pictures here for you to understand more about how we, particularly how we go from the landfill and that methane all the way over to electricity. So you can follow this diagram on your own, from the collection of the methane to the processing of the methane, and then to use it for converting into electricity. And I showed you a picture at the bottom of some of the tubes or hoses for the methane capturing and methane transport across the landfill. And then the details that you don't really need to know, but it's just interesting, going from the treatment of the methane to make it actually usable for us. Okay, I've gone over almost all of this, but there's just a little bit that I didn't. Can you find what I didn't go over? Pause the video. So for waste to energy, I've taught you this a million times from last unit. And then remember, waste to energy reduces the amount of waste in a landfill, so that's a good thing. But we're still going to produce that ash, that hazardous waste, and that air pollution. For methane gas capturing and use, I did not emphasize the third bullet here, that some of the methane can still escape, and it is a greenhouse gas, which is bad, bad, bad. And I did show you that there's primary, secondary, and tertiary treatment. So it goes through multiple levels of cleaning that gas because it's really low quality methane. So it's going to require a lot of refining for us to use it in its pure form. Okay, I would pause this part of the video and then cover up the answers so you don't see them, but go ahead and work your way through some of this math practice. And this math practice is particularly linked to e-waste. Okay, how are we doing? So we had to learn about and to be able to describe changes to current practices that could reduce the amount of waste that we generated. So now you should be able to tell me a little more about recycling, which is solid waste materials converted into new products, and you should tell me that it costs a lot to do and it's energy intensive. You should be able to tell me the drawbacks and benefits of composting, and tell me what new stuff you learned about e-waste and how we mitigate the trash that we put in our landfill. What are some landfill mitigation strategies, and what's up with the combustion of gases produced aerobically and anaerobically with landfills? Okay, next section, we're going to learn about sewage treatment, your sewage, what goes down your toilet and your shower drain. On the test, you have to know about the best practices that we use in treating our sewage. So you go in the bathroom, you're washing your hands, you're washing the dishes, you're doing laundry, and all of that wastewater goes somewhere. And in our country, it goes to a sewage treatment plant. And in sewage treatment, we actually treat it through several different steps, and you're going to need to know the details of each of these steps and what happens. We have our primary, secondary, and tertiary treatment, and then right before we discharge it, we use chlorine, ozone, or UV light to kill additional bacteria. And then we still put that water right back into our streams. Now, if you're not on public water, you could be on a septic tank. So this is not public sewage. This is just on-site sewage and how you treat your sewage when it's on-site just at your home. So just to show you this picture, look where the toilet is and the shower is and the bathroom. And then your sewage comes down a pipe and it's on its very own sewage line. And if you are on public, this pipe's just going to go right out to a sewage line in, where your neighborhood, all the other sewage lines meet up, and it goes to the sewage treatment plant. Or your sewage goes into your backyard, into a septic tank. You're not allowed to put trees on top of this. And you're also not allowed to put trees on top of your leach field, because the roots of the trees can actually damage your septic tank, or they can poke through the liner of your leach field. And if there's groundwater underneath, and we don't want your sewage to not get treated by all the microbes in the soil quick enough and then leak into the groundwater, because if you're on septic, then you're probably also on well water. So your sewage goes into a septic tank. It gets treated there from a similar process of a lot of bacteria, microorganisms that treat it and break it down. And then the water gets released into a leach field, which is like a drainage field that purifies it more. And then eventually the water gets cleaned through all the stuff in here, which even includes charcoal, and then it gets released into your soil. So remember, I've referred to sewage also as wastewater. You'll hear me use those terms interchangeably. And it's just contaminated water from homes, schools, businesses, and everything else that I already told you about. So let's look at the house in this picture. Follow my little laser pointer. So the sewage in your house, if it's not going on site to a septic field, it's going in these pipes down into your street that the whole neighborhood shares, into a massive sanitary sewer line. And as you can see, the sewer line and the storm drain line, they run under our roads, and then they go to the wastewater treatment plant sometimes, and other times the storm drains and the storm lines will go right into a stormwater management facility before it gets released into a stream, or it goes directly to a stream and gets released right from your street and the storm drain right into the water. Now, if they don't work together, then the sanitary sewer is just going to go to a treatment plant, which is what we're going to get to next, a sewage or wastewater treatment plant. Okay, if you live in Harford County, then your water gets treated at any of these blue dots. The blue dots are your water treatment facilities, and your wastewater or sewer water is going to get treated at the green triangles. So green triangles. Green triangles. So if you live in Bel Air or Aberdeen, your wastewater, your sewage, is going to be on that pipe system that goes for miles and 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 miles all the way to the treatment plant. How many miles? 750 miles of pipe. So I really want you to watch these videos so that you can understand the details in sewage treatment. This one shows you all the steps for how, this is what it's titled, How Do Wastewater Treatment Plants Work? I want you to look this up on YouTube and watch it alone, pause this. And then I'd like you to look at this second video just so that you don't see it animated, you actually see what it looks like in live video feed. And that's called Watch How Wastewater is Cleaned. So give yourself a few minutes, and I want you to look at that primary, secondary, and tertiary treatment that your wastewater goes through before your wastewater gets released back into a stream. Okay, so remember that I said there is primary, secondary, and tertiary treatment. Now, if you look over on the right side of the slide, here's how you remember these. Primary is physical. Primary, PP. Primary is the physical process, just the physical steps. Secondary is going to be the biological steps. Secondary is biological treatment. And then the tertiary, which is also part of like disinfection, tertiary and disinfection, that's going to be like more ecological and additional chemical, ecological and chemical. So if you remember your primary with the P, your secondary with the B, and the tertiary with everything else, you should be good to go. So the portion of the steps that I have listed on the left side is actually a little more closely aligned with that essential knowledge. So make sure you know that primary includes like screening. It has grates. I'm going to show you pictures in a minute. And like large stuff is removed, you know, like if someone somehow gets a diaper in the sewage water, which I don't know how that would not clog your toilet, but it was just an example. It was just a really bad example. Secondary is where we're going to produce sludge and CO2. And then the tertiary is where we're removing like those pollutants like nitrogen and phosphorus. We can't remove all pollutants. Remember that forever and for always. We can't remove them all. But nitrogen and phosphorus we do have a treatment for because it's so bad for the ecosystem, the whole environment. And then disinfection, we'll use ozone or chlorine and or UV light in order to kill bacteria that could make us very sick. And then just like in mining, in the Mining Reclamation Act, we then have to do monitoring. And that's because of the Clean Water Act and the Safe Drinking Water Act. So yay. Okay, I took this one from College Board for you. So this is a page of primary treatment, and it specifically shows you like a screening tank, which if you look at the videos, you will see that really, really well. And then they show you in their big diagram, which I do not have very big, like sticks and rocks and toys and other large objects have been screened out. And then, oh, by the way, then all that stuff goes to the landfill, just like fills up a trash truck. Now remember that our secondary treatment, secondary was biological, so they're using bacteria. So secondary is bio, using bacteria, and the bacteria are going to aerobically decompose all that organic matter. So they're aerating it using bacteria and oxygen to help decompose the organic matter, like your poop. That's what the organic matter is. So this is a picture of an aeration tank. So lots of good, healthy bacteria in there are going to break it down and decompose it. And then we move on to our tertiary treatment. And remember I said tertiary is going to be like that ecological and chemical piece, okay? So they remove other impurities and nitrogen and phosphorus-like chemicals. And then it goes on to disinfection with chlorine and ozone and or UV light. And then, of course, last but not least, we do the monitoring of the water and what's being discharged out of those point sources. Okay, so you should feel like an expert on sewage treatment and how, what are the best practices for that. Now, 8.12 and 8.13 are both about lethal doses, but I'm introducing it to you here because you're going to need more than a day to take this all in. But lethal dose has to do with exposure to something toxic. So think about what we've been learning about. How do you get exposed to lethal things? Well, from the air and from the water. So when you look at this essential knowledge statement, this is what you need to remember about the definition. Lethal dose is also known as LD. So lethal dose 50 means 50% of the population of something, 50% of the population of people that are exposed, let's say, that chemical becomes lethal to. So LD50 means 50% of the population dies, lethal. And here it is from the College Board slide. And remember, we're going to talk about this next time too. But we're looking at toxins. So keep thinking about the toxins that I was showing you in your drinking water quality reports. So an amount of a chemical that becomes lethal to 50% of the population. I'm going to show you a curve on that in a minute, okay? And that really boils down to body mass. And we test on other organisms often, and then we just assume, okay, if a mouse like dies at 5 grams per pound of body weight, then what, we'll extrapolate that to per pound of body weight for a human. That's what that means by extrapolated to humans. Okay, and lethal doses are studied all the time in bioaccumulation and biomagnification. Other things about lethal doses is everything has a lethal dose. Everything can be toxic at a certain amount. So it's amounts of a substance that become lethal. And like I said, we look at this in grams or milligrams per pound or kilogram of body mass. So that's the units that we use, and you'll get familiar with them when we look at the charts and we extrapolate the data. Okay, so when we're looking at a lethal dose study, we're really looking at one type of dose response study. Lethal dose is one type. There's also lethal concentration. There's many types of dose response studies. So we might be looking at a dosage for therapeutic effects, but in this case, we're looking at death, okay, deadly effects. So dose response study are looking at a chemical and being exposed to that chemical and observing the responses, and in this case, mortality. So look at the chart right here. If we have mortality up to 100%, you can see by this chart that 0% of the people that take this small dose over here in milligrams per gram of body weight don't die. If, right here, we'll go right here, if people take like almost 5 milligrams per kilogram of body weight here, then 25% of those people will die. That's the mortality rate. So an LD50 means that 50% of the population will die if they are exposed to this dosage, which is around almost 5.5. In this case, we'll call it milligrams per kilogram of body weight. So that's what an LD50 is. And the curves typically look like this. Looks kind of familiar, huh? So we look at lethal doses just like therapeutic doses and other types, acutely and chronically. Sometimes we look at a dose like immediately. How does somebody get affected by, in just a short time, like a couple days or a day? And then we also look at chronic studies. So that's where we might look at the effects on an organism or a human over time. And we just discussed the LD50, which is a study that's just looking at the lethal dose that kills 50% of the individuals that are exposed to the harmful, in this case it could be a toxin, but it could be just a chemical, some kind of chemical for a medicine. All right, so that's enough of this presentation. This is Mrs. Gabriel signing out.